Welcome back. This is Alfred Weber, and we're with Kevin Annett, who is the director of the International Tribunal into the Crimes of Church and State. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks, Alfred.
Well, it's been quite an exciting week for you. As I understand it, you were in the UK or about to go into the UK, and you were commanded to leave the UK. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about what occurred to you over the past week.
Well, what happened was in early May I went into England and to help organize events leading up to the tribunal against primarily the Catholic Church, but also we've named the Crown of England as an actor in genocide. And I left after a few weeks. I went to the Netherlands to receive the endorsement of a federation there of indigenous nations in Europe. And after getting that endorsement for our tribunal, I tried re-entering England at Stansted Airport on the evening of May 29th. I was detained there for 12 hours, photographed, fingerprinted, held in a prison, and eventually deported without being able to return into England. The only reason they gave for that happening was they said that they considered it unusual for a visitor or tourist to England to be giving lectures, which I found quite odd. I said, what, people never give talks when they come to England? And apparently because I didn't have a work permit, even though I wasn't making money off these lectures, they suddenly said I needed a work permit. And on that basis, I was simply deported. So it was very odd, and I was on the verge of giving a speech at a public gathering in Trafalgar Square on June 4th. I was to be one of the main speakers at a rally against child abuse, which was going to discuss the involvement, apparently, of government officials in pedophilia and child trafficking in England. So I don't think that's an accident that I was stopped from speaking at that rally, or that they're considering this tribunal obviously some kind of threat.
Right, and so you think that there was a connection between your being deported from England and the fact that the tribunals are to be convened in September of this year?
Very much. I mean, I've been very active and outspoken in England. And what was kind of the tip-off for me is when I was standing there in front of the border agency, the guy looked quite unconcerned until he ran my passport through his machine, and he looked on the computer screen. He looked alarmed, then he went and spoke to his supervisor, and immediately after that came back and put me through the ringer. So, I mean, obviously there was something on the computer screen that had alerted him to me.
Now, what do you suppose would be going on in the UK, and what sort of authority could issue such an order? I mean, this seems like it's something that's fairly drastic.
Well, don't forget, for the last little while, we have been discussing all over the internet and in public meetings how we had an eyewitness, William Coombs, who claimed to have seen Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip take 10 children from a Catholic residential school in Kamloops in 1964, and these 10 children were never seen again. William died subsequently. He was going to come to England and give that testimony in September, and he died suddenly in a Vancouver hospital just a couple of months ago. And, so I was talking about that. We were definitely naming the Crown of England as an actor in genocide, as the body that's responsible ultimately, along with the Vatican, for the deaths of tens of thousands of children in Indian boarding schools in Canada. So, the fact that the Queen herself might be implicated in these things, I think, is no small issue in their mind, at least. And the fact that I was talking about it all over Europe, I'm sure alarmed them. Well,
now I'm looking at your website here. It's ITCCS.org, and you state there that tribunals are to be convened in London, Dublin, Brussels, and Rome on September 15th, 2011. So it seems like you've expanded your operations since since we last spoke.
It's expended a lot, Alfred, and in fact, that's another reason why I think that the authorities are beginning to turn the screws on us a little bit. What we've decided to do is, on the basis of all the support we're getting here, we realize that we need to hold a number of different events at the same time. We chose Brussels, of course, because that's that's the headquarters of the European Union and the European Parliament, which we've asked to come and observe and assist in our proceedings. The European Parliament has told us, a number of MPs there have said that they would be willing to entertain a motion to have Canada investigated for genocide. We're going to London and Rome for obvious reasons, and Dublin because there's a big movement there of survivors that want to very much be part of what we're doing. But at the same time, we'll be holding gatherings across Canada, in Vancouver and Toronto and Ottawa, to coincide with the tribunal, where we're basically going to be gathering the evidence, summoning the various people, including Pope Joseph Ratzinger and the Queen, to come and answer these charges, and eventually issue a report which has a lot of the evidence, of the crimes we're speaking of.
Right. Now, you also mentioned that there's going to be tribunals in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, New York City, Mexico City, and Australia, but those will be in the future, or is that?
Well, it's going to be commencing, hopefully, again, September 15th. And
I see.
What's going on is, as people can see by looking at the website, ITCCS.org, is that there's basically going to be an initial 6-week period running up to the end of October where we're going to be conducting this tribunal, going to various places in Europe, because just like in Canada, there's sites all around Europe where there are mass graves near especially Catholic institutions where a lot of children died. Prime example being near the Magdalen laundries and Catholic orphanages in Ireland. And so we're going to be conducting, as we'll be doing in Canada, forensic studies and digs at these places to obtain the evidence that children were deliberately killed in these institutions. And on October 30th and 31st, there's going to be a general gathering in Rome outside the Vatican where groups of us are going to be conducting services. I'm going to be conducting like a third and final symbolic exorcism outside the Vatican and we're going to be hoping that there'll be a European media will be covering this in a big way. We've already had an indication that European television networks will be broadcasting what we're doing, since they've already broadcast to over 10 million people our film Unrepentant about genocide in Canadian boarding schools. So, we're very hopeful that that 6-week period is really going to engender a lot of results and certainly a response by the church and the government that are being named.
One of the items here says as follows: Pope Joseph Ratzinger and Queen Elizabeth Windsor have both been issued a public summons by the ITCCS to appear before it in September of 2011 and answer charges of their complicity in crimes against humanity, genocide, and child trafficking. Could you go into some of the details, both as to Pope Joseph Ratzinger and as to Queen Elizabeth Windsor? I know that we had one of the charges just talked about, but at least so that our audience gets an idea of the scale of crimes that we're talking about here.
Well, starting just in terms of the Indian boarding school experience in Canada and the United States, these schools were founded on similar institutions all over the world, but in a general sense, we're talking about the deaths of over 50,000 children, authorized by the Crown of England and the Vatican working together. We also are naming the fact that the Pope himself is personally implicated in protecting child rapists within the church and implementing a policy that he helped construct, which silences anybody who's been harmed by a priest, which in effect is a criminal conspiracy to keep the torture and abuse of children a secret and to avoid prosecution. So he's personally implicated in that. The Queen of England, of course, is the head of state in Canada and the head of the Church of England, is directly responsible in a fiduciary sense for a lot of these crimes. And these crimes range from everything from outright homicide to policies of ethnic cleansing, sterilization programs that operated in the Indian boarding schools and at other facilities around the world. All of these given sanction by the Crown of England through laws brought in under her name and her predecessors. So, I mean, it's a direct responsibility for really mass murder, medical experimentation, slave labor, and a system of child trafficking and child labor, which, in the case of the Magdalen laundries, continued right up to 1996 and didn't occur just in Ireland. The Magdalen laundries operated in 35 countries, including Canada. I just got a call the other day from somebody who was in one of these facilities in Canada, and this is where young women, when they got pregnant and weren't married, their children were taken from them, and they were put into situations of forced labor for decades, most of their life in many cases. So the Vatican has made millions, if not billions of dollars off the labor of these children. And, it not only do they need to be held accountable in a criminal sense and prosecuted, but a lot of that wealth, all that wealth that they made off these children has got to be returned and compensated in a serious way.
Now, there have already been reports of mass graves and of the remains of children that have not been found here in Canada, despite the fact that there is an official Aboriginal Commission that is looking into this. How will this tribunal deal with these issues?
Well, frankly, Alfred, one of the motivating forces in setting up the ITCCS was in response to the clear whitewash being done by the government's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The mandate of the TRC, which you can read at trc.ca, in Section 2, it's clearly not an investigative body. They're not allowed to take down evidence when it names names, when it talks about crimes. They're in no position to prosecute the churches, and they do not even address the issue of the deaths that occurred in the grave sites in the residential schools. They talk around the issue, but they don't actually have the power to lay criminal charges or even subpoena documents. There's nothing the TRC does which compels the churches to cooperate. And so it's not a real investigation by any stretch of the imagination. It's designed pretty much to create an appearance of an investigation while protecting the perpetrators and pretty much silencing the witnesses. And that's pretty clear from what's going on. So what we need to do in Canada is what we've already started to do. We've identified 28 mass grave sites, mostly in Western Canada, near former residential schools. We have local elders in 5 different Indigenous nations standing by, ready to authorize digs on their land. And we already have the written authorization from 2 of those nations. So we're prepared to go in. We've already been invited in to come and conduct those forensic digs and help the elders return the remains of these children for a proper burial. So that'll be happening over the next period. And frankly, when that happens, it's going to open up this entire issue again and make the Canadian government and its churches clear, it'll be clear that they're actors in genocide, not only in the crime, but in the cover-up that's been going on.
Right. Now, this tribunal you mentioned has the endorsement of over 30 organizations, including 8 indigenous nations in North America and Asia, as well as survivors of the Catholic Church torture in Ireland, Australia, and England, and the autonomous sovereign nation of Eurostatus. Could you perhaps talk about some of the organizations that have endorsed and support the work of the ITCCS?
Yes, I can mention the ones that have given their approval to be named publicly at this point. One right here on the West Coast, Chief Capilano of the Squamish Nation. Several years ago, he was actually the first hereditary elder in Canada to endorse the tribunal, the idea of an independent international inquiry into genocide in Canada. And he has traditional sovereign jurisdiction over the entire area, embracing all of Vancouver. In fact, Capilano issued an eviction order to the Catholic, Anglican, and